Alright, welcome back to the channel. This is a video that I've been wanting to do for a while now, but basically it is going to be a monster side deck tier list, and I'm also going to talk about these cards individually as well. So to kind of be not only a tier list, but me describing the strengths and weaknesses of some of them and just my overall thoughts on a lot of these cards. I think there are 18 in total. So let's just start off with one that I think is an absolute S tier side deck monster. This thing. So Fossil Dyna is absolutely absurd in Edison format, and there's a couple reasons why. One, it's a Floodgate, it's a normal summon, it has decent stats, it gets under bottomless trap hole, which is very relevant. Randomly, the flip effect is also extremely good because it catches people off guard. It's one of the only ways to trade with an absolute zero as a 1-for-1. Most of the times when you trade with absolute zero, like if you bottomless it or deep prison it or whatever, it'll take your monsters too, so it'll typically go at least 2-for-1 or more. Fossil Dyna can just be set against an absolute zero and it'll trade favorably, or not favorably, but literally 1-for-1 in my opinion is favorably at that point because absolute zero is such a ridiculous card. The main thing about this card, and this is one of the reasons why I started siding Mirror Force and Torrential Tribute in my Frog deck, is because Fossil Dyna represents guaranteed damage. And if you don't know what I mean by that, when you're playing with the Frog deck and you have like a Battle Fader or a Gorz or Dragodi and your field is completely open, you feel pretty safe typically. But Fossil Dyna is one of the only things in the game that can out of nowhere make whatever your opponent already has on the field plus the Fossil Dyna itself become guaranteed damage against your life points. And it's really obnoxious. In game one, you typically feel safe because there are, I almost want to say there's no decks that main deck Fossil Dyna. I'm sure that there are, but like they're not that good. But in games 2 and 3, you do have to be wary of the fact that your opponent could out of nowhere, if they already have Stratos up, they could also drop a Fossil Dyna and now you're taking 3,000. And you could have a Gorz or a Battle Fader and feel really safe, and then out of nowhere, yeah, your life points can just drop fast. I think that this is one of the scariest cards that Value Turbo sides because that deck can burst out damage like no other. So if they just go Greffer Pitch, and now they have the Value in Sirocco Engrave, and a lot of times they might not even use it turn one because they don't want to get like soul exchanged or whatever and lose both of their monsters off the bat. So they can just hold that in the graveyard, and then whenever they have a Fossil Dyna, now it's Fossil Dyna plus the 2300 arm wing, which is 3500 damage. And if you add in a Greffer too, then you're talking about 5200 damage. So that's a lot of life points to lose out of nowhere. And in their godly hands, they can do stuff like special Greffer, discarding Sirocco, pitch a dark, send Value, activate Value, summon Armwing, then normal summon Dyna, and they have all of that damage in one turn. So again, you just have to be really cautious. Fossil Dyna is amazing. It's also really good against recruiters, against decks like Fairies, where their recruiters have really bad defense, and people tend to set them a lot. Shining Angel, Nova Summoner, they get run over by Fossil Dyna, and they get no actual effect. So that's a big deal too. And it could also be really good against heavy combo decks like Dragon Turbo, Diva Hero, and you get the idea. But yeah, I think Fossil Dyna is absolutely absurd in this format. It is essentially a Vanity's Fiend, but it's much easier to get out because of it being 4 stars, and that is huge. So I wanted to make sure I start off with something that was really, really strong. Okay, next is DD Warrior Lady. So I actually really like that this is sided at all. I'm seeing it pop up more and more often. I think one of the first times I saw DD Warrior Lady being sided was, I want to say, it was a Frog player. It might have been Ronak. I can just attribute most Frog things to Ronak, especially from a while ago. But I know that at one point, Frog decks that already play Reinforcement of the Army could side DD Warrior Lady as an out to opposing Vanity's Fiends, if your opponent might be on Fossil Dyna and stuff like that. I like that this card just outs all of those things, and you're already playing Rhoda anyway, so just siding one DD Warrior Lady doesn't exactly go against your total game plan. It's one of the only searchable warriors that can out things like Fossil Dyna and Vanity's Fiend. And against Fossil Dyna, it just straight beats over it, which is really, really good, because then it just still sits there and it'll take another monster in theory. Also, just like I said about Fossil Dyna, this card trades favorably with Absolute Zero, because if you can go 1-for-1 with an Absolute Zero, that is a trade that you should always be happy to accept. Not many cards can do that to Absolute Zero. And banishing it is big too, because that means that it can't be used for the next Miracle Fusion. Like that Absolute Zero won't be a water or a hero monster for the next one. But yeah, she's nothing crazy. I'm just putting it in B tier because I want people to be aware that this is something that you can side. And I think that in certain decks, if you're already playing Rhoda, this is a totally reasonable side. I see more people siding it in Hero Beat, and that makes sense as well. Just one copy, you don't have to go overboard with it. But yeah, DD War Lady is a slept on card. Pretty good. Okay, Consecrated Light. So this card really should only be sided against, I want to say, Black Wings. I have actually had someone sided against when I was playing Value Turbo. and randomly they did win that game. It was game 2, and I don't think you should be siding this against Value Turbo because it plays a lot of outs. Like we still had Rai-Oh in the deck, and Hamster I think was still in the deck. So it just has like natural built-in outs to Consecrate it. But against Black Wings, this card is insane. Obviously, if you have it with something like the Kree, it's even more insane because otherwise they could out it with Icarus attack. But still, a Consecrated Light, especially if you see multiples or if you establish it more than once, it can be really difficult. Like the first one, don't expect the first one to just solo the Blackwing deck. But the second one, dear God, every time a second Consecrated Light comes down, it's just like, really, bro? Like that card is really, really annoying and really hard to out. And if Norlaris is becoming a little bit more popular, you might be able to side against something like that. Although I would say that that's also iffy because that deck plays like a couple Light Swarm monsters and Charge of the Light Brigade and stuff like that. So it's a little easier to out. But Blackwings, even when the deck sides, right, like depending on what you're playing, they can't really side all of their cards against you. Like they sometimes side Snowman Eater or Cyber Dragon or Fossil Dyna. But like Christia Swarm, for example, a deck that would side Consecrated Light against Blackwings, Snowman Eater isn't exactly the best side deck against that deck. So they can't really bring that in against you. Now they would bring in Fossil Dyna, but then it comes down to, well, you need to draw it. And I'm sure you only side like 2 of it anyway. But I do think Consecrated is very, very good. It's one of the only cards that can, like if your opponent opens up like Whirlwind Shora, this is an answer that can absolutely bring you back into the game and give you enough time to draw into outs to not only that field, but just to kind of win the game, because it is a very, very powerful Floodgate with very few outs in reality. Although I will say most people don't know that you can brain control Consecrated Light and then tribute for Sirocco, and that's a pretty big deal. I think in one of our recent videos we did that to an opponent and they thought that it wasn't a thing, but yeah, apparently you can brain control and then tribute it for Sirocco, and that is an out too. So between that and Icarus attack, there are like a few things that the Blackwing deck can do inherently, but it really does come down to most of the time Icarus attack. And if you know that they're going to side Icarus attack against you, then you can side Starlight Road. So then if you have something like Consecrated Light plus Starlight Road or Consecrated Light plus Decree, it's essentially an OTK against Blackwings. And because Blackwings is, in my opinion, like the best deck in the format, and if not the best deck, then literally one of the best S tier decks in the format, Consecrated Light is a card that you will see forever in Edison format just because Blackwings is so well represented. Okay, next up we have DD Crow. I'm going to put this in S tier even though I have a very love-hate relationship with this card. It's because it's so wishy-washy, and I'm learning to just not side it in a lot of matchups. For example, you would think that this card would be really good against something like Diva Hero or Hero Beat or whatever, but in my experience, it is literally a coin flip on whether or not it's going to be good in those matchups. So think about this scenario and tell me how common this sounds. Your Diva Hero or Diva Hero Beat opponent goes summon Stratos, they search another hero. And then on the following turn, they go summon Diva, and they either make like a synchro or they do some crazy stuff. At that point, DD Crow won't do anything for the rest of the game because that is now 2 heroes, Stratos and whatever it searched, and then 2 water monsters, Diva and whatever it searched. So that opening that I just talked about, where they open up like Stratos and then followed up with a Diva or vice versa, however you want to slice it, whenever that happens, that inherently plays around DD Crow. And it is one of the reasons why I don't really like siding DD Crow against Diva Hero, unless you're siding one of it. Like if you saw one DD Crow against it, sure, because you're just trying to, at that point, get lucky and hope that it lines up at the right moment and it could save your life. But other than that, it's really wishy-washy. It's really a coin flip on whether or not it's going to be good. Where I think this card does shine, though, is against zombies and Light Sworn / Christia Sworn decks. It's really, really strong against those. So against zombies, it prevents OTKs because they won't be able to use Mizuki or Plague Spreader or Zombie Master, and cutting that off and giving yourself another turn is huge because typically the deck will try to overextend a bit, summoning their Bryonic, and then once their Bryonics on the field, if you can get rid of it, then for the rest of the game, you can kind of breathe a lot easier knowing that Bryonic is not in their arsenal anymore. So I like DD Crow for just survivability against zombies. And then I like it against Christia Sworn and Light Sworn because after a Beckoning Light, you can mess up their graveyard. So especially Christia Sworn because they need like the 4 fairies to summon Christia. And if they set it up perfectly, then you just crow them. And that turn is typically going to be a wash and then you just have to retaliate with something. So in those matchups, Crow is very good. Against Frogs, Crow is also kind of ass because Treeborn's at 2. And crowing just one of them doesn't really solve the problem. If you have double crow, then sure. But just having one crow throughout the game, and if you only saw 2 of it, then the chances of you having both are like really low. Hitting one Treeborn Frog is not it. Even against the Hero Frog list, like there's a high chance that your opponent can easily play around DD Crow because they're going to have a lot of water monsters in the grave. And then just having 2 heroes, 1 in the grave and 1 on the field, is a very common thing to have happen during a game against Hero Frogs, so it's not even really good against that build either. And I know it sounds like I'm just shitting on DD Crow right now, like why would I ever have this in S tier, but it is truly one of the only forms of interaction that, one, your opponent, they can't really predict it, like they can try to play around it as best they can, but it is a hand trap, and Edison is not a format that has a lot of hand traps. And sometimes sniping like a Hero Blast or a Pot of Avarice or Debris Dragon, or a Mizuki play, or a Plague Spreader, or a Malicious that just got sent to the graveyard. Those things can be really, really big. And again, with Nurlaris becoming a more popular deck, DD Crow is even better because that deck is obnoxious, and nobody feels like losing their hand on the first turn. Also, DD Crow is pretty good against the Phoenician Cluster Amaryllis deck. Like, that is another way to add value to this card, because being able to cut off the actual cluster or a volcanic counter is really clutch in a lot of scenarios. That deck trades damage for card advantage, so a lot of times they don't have a lot of cards, but they have a board presence with Titanial and a couple clusters, and if you could just get rid of the clusters, then Titanial is weaker and susceptible to things like Deep Prison and all that, so DD Crow helps in that matchup a lot as well. Okay, next I want to talk about Grand Mole. So I think Grand Mole is an A tier side deck monster. It's very good. It's actually very, very good. It also trades really well with Absolute Zero, which is the reason why I have such a high regard for where it is. I think that alone is huge because to me, the format is Miracle Fusion decks and then value Sirocco decks. So being able to trade with Armwing and trade with Absolute Zero in a actual positive way, like I'm using it correctly this time, like this is an actual positive. That monster goes back to the extra deck and then the Grand Mole goes back to your hand. So they go -1. Yeah, Grand Mole is pretty good. It's at 1 in the format, and I think that makes sense. It's also good if you're already kind of winning the game. Like if you're already in the position of having tempo, meaning you just have a monster on the field and your opponent doesn't, and they have to go set a monster, and then you have Grand Mole. We've all been there. That is one of the best feelings, and also one of the worst feelings if you're the person on the other side of it. Like if your opponent establishes an alias, and you have to set a monster like Rai-Oh, and they go summon Grand Mole to follow up the alias, you're mad. You're fucking big mad. But yeah, the fact that it outs every synchro in the format basically is a big deal. The only problem with it really is that you use your normal summon to get this guy out, and it can kind of leave you open if you're also not in a winning position, it's not that good. So if your opponent has like Stratos and Alias on the field and you have Grand Mole, you're kind of tight because then you're not really accomplishing anything. And if you bounce the Alias or bounce, God forbid, you're not bouncing. If you bounce the Alias, then you're just going to get attacked directly by Stratos. And the hero beat opponent will gladly take that 1800 damage on you. So yeah, Grand Mole is very good. It does come with some weaknesses, but it is still a very, very good side deck card in the format. Okay, Breaker the Magical Warrior, I'm going to put in B tier. This might even be C tier, but I'm going to say B tier to be nice. The only decks that I really see side this are fairies typically because they're trying to do multiple things. They're trying to dodge Deck Devastation Virus, which is an automatic win against that deck, and also deal with Light Imprisoning Mirror. So this guy is the perfect card to do both of those things. The only problem that I have with it really, and it is a big problem, Fairies is already a very normal summon heavy deck, like extremely normal summon heavy. And then this is just another normal summon. So if you're siding out some of your normal summons to put this in, like sure, but it doesn't solve that problem for the deck. On top of that, it doesn't really have any synergy with the deck either though. Like it's not searchable by anything. It's dark, so unless you're playing the Chaos Fairy build, then there's no value in it actually being a dark monster. Because at least the Chaos Fairy build will play like a lure. It has Chaos Sorcerer and all these other ways to convert off of a Breaker that's been used, but in a typical Fairy deck, it's just like, yeah, Breaker's just sitting out there waiting to be attacked by Shura. I do like that it deals with Deck Devastation Virus and Light Mirror, but like, again, unless you have a trap to go with the Breaker, it's kind of awkward. And even then, you can only defend it for so long, right? Because there's no conversion in a standard Fairy deck with the Breaker. Like, are you going to summon Herald of Orange Light and then turn into a Synchro? Like, what's going to happen to the Breaker just sitting there at 1600? So I'm not the biggest fan. Maybe this is actually, I'm just going to put this in C tier. I'm going to put this in C tier. Okay, Mobius the Frost Monarch. So I've been seeing this one pop up recently, especially because, one, frogs are just really, really popular at the moment, and two, in theory, it does a really, really good thing, but I think that it doesn't do it unless you have support. And what I mean by that is trap stun. So if you're siding trap stun in your frog deck, then that makes sense because Mobius and trap stun is insane. But if you're just siding Mobius, I don't think it makes as much sense because everyone is already siding pulling the rug naturally against the deck. And it makes it no different than any other Monarch, but what makes it worse to me is the situations where you need the Mobius to be a Monarch that removes things from the field because of aggression. So you need a Caius or a Ryza, and then you have a Mobius instead. That sucks. Then that does come up. Like, that is 100% a thing that comes up. When I was playing the Frog deck that plays like that Stylus and everything, that was one of the problems, obviously, with that Stylus. Is as strong as it is when you're already kind of in a neutral game state or in a winning game state, it's really bad when your opponent has like 3 monsters on the field and you're taking a card out of their hand. They don't really care. They're trying to kill you. Mobius is in that same ballpark where it's like, okay, your opponent has a Fossil Dyna on the field and you're able to tribute for a Monarch because you set a dupe prog or something, but it's Mobius. Is really obnoxious that you rather just be a Caius or something, right? But again, I do really like it with Trap Stun specifically. I think that that is a really cool combo because you can go draw phase, Trap Stun, then bring back Treeborn Frog in the standby phase, and you contribute for Mobius, and they can't use their pulling the rugs and whatever else they have set. So he's guaranteed to pop 2. You don't really go that plus in that scenario. It is like a +1, but some people think like, oh, you actually got rid of 2 cards, but then you used Trap Stun at that turn, so you're down the Trap Stun, and then your Monarch is just sitting on the field, and your opponent hopefully has lost 2 cards. So it's only a +1. It's not some crazy like blowout. Now, if you're also playing Cold Wave, Mobius is nice. Cold Wave is another reason why this card could be really good. You can Cold Wave. You could also Econ before you do Cold Wave in a standby phase, which is when you would do it anyway with a Frog deck. Yeah, Cold Wave and Trap Stun make this card like a pretty decent side deck card. And I do like that it has synergy naturally with Frogs too. Let me say that. Like, it is a water monster, so worst come to worst, you could just pitch it for Swap Frog or something, and that's pretty cool. But yeah, I'm going to place this one in B tier. Okay, Cyber Dragon, a lot of people might think this is a hot take, but I think that this card is a solid A tier. I don't think it's S tier anymore. It used to be every side deck started off with double Cyber Dragon or whatever, but it's just not as good. One, machine decks are not well represented in Edison format, so that's just the first thing. It's very rare that you're going to play against the machine deck. It's very rare that you're going to get the contact with this thing. If you do, congratulations, you're playing 2022 Edison. But in 2023, the format is getting so solidified to just being like Frogs, Vayu, Black Wings, and Hero Beat / Diva Hero, whatever. So those are like the main decks. And Cyber Dragon isn't really good against any of those. Not even really against the Diva Hero Beat decks, where it used to be good against Hero Beat because they just summon an alias and attack you with it until you die. And Cyber Dragon is pretty good against that strategy. But the ones that play Diva on top of the Hero Beat engine, they often go like turn 1 magical android, or they convert their aliases on the field into a Bryonic plus Miracle Fusion play that tries to kill you. And Cyber Dragon doesn't really help you in those situations because they're not just trying to beat you down with a 1900 monster. It's very different from the way it used to play because they added Diva and Gilman. And because most people are not playing decks like Glad Beast anymore, which is another matchup where Cyber Dragon would be good, that's why it's just, again, not that good. There aren't many matchups for it to be as good as it used to be. Like, I don't like this card against Black Wings. I don't like it against Vayu Turbo. I don't like it against Christia Sworn. I don't like it against Zombies. I don't like it against Fairies. I definitely don't like it against Monarchs. And I'm just naming, those are like some of the most popular decks in the format, and I don't want it against any of those decks. So I don't really know when I would really want Cyber Dragon, but I get one of the things that I do like about it is when you go second and you are playing a deck that does play Caius, because pretty much every deck does at this point, Cyber Dragon is really good at kind of stealing going first in a way. I always say this as like a joke, but it's really not. So if your opponent goes set a monster and you're also playing a deck that sets a monster, I think you should be siding Cyber Dragon for just those games, because having this is to set a Rai-Oh after your opponent already set a Rai-Oh is obnoxious, and it's probably just you lose the game right there. But Cyber Dragon allows you to trade favorably with their Rai-Oh first, and you just, you 1-for-1 there. And in my opinion, that's very good for you because now you can set your traps, you could set your own Rai-Oh, you could do all these different things in main phase 2. So Cyber Dragon is very good, and that's the reason why I'm keeping it in A tier, is because when you're going second, I think that this card is really, really good for those kinds of decks. If machine decks were still around like that, or if I thought that there were a lot of opportunities to contact, then I would definitely have it in S tier. But again, I just don't think that you're running into many scenarios where that's what you're doing with it. But stealing the tempo when you're going second is pretty nice. So yeah. Oh, I almost forgot to say it, but yeah, going second and being able to go Cyber Dragon Caius on your first turn and your opponent has a set monster, really, really strong play. And it's one of the reasons why I would include it in any deck that needs to set monsters, just so you can clear the way to do that or just to summon Caius. Okay, Puppet Plant. So I'm gonna put this in B tier. This actually could be a lot better, but the only deck that I could imagine really siding this is Frogs. And I thought about this for a while when I had a choice between siding this or Super Polymerization. So Super Poly is just like game winning and absolutely absurd, and that card is so crazy that it wasn't being sided this year until recently. But Puppet Plant, in theory, you can steal in the Hero Beat matchup, you can steal Alias, and they can't Gemini Spark it because you don't have anything on the field to Gemini Spark. So that's one thing. That's really, really good. It's just like a clean way to deal with Alias. Also, the monster can attack and be tributed. So like you can steal Alias and attack over like a fossil Dyna and then tribute it for something. That's really, really strong. But I just haven't tested it enough because I always felt like you don't have space to side this and Super Poly, at least not multiple copies of both. Maybe you could side like one of this or something. But I didn't have enough time to test it and really see like, is this card better than B tier? Because in theory, it sounds really good. That scenario I just said where you steal their Alias and they can't Gemini Spark, and then you could tribute it for like a Monarch or something, and then you could hit the Gemini Spark with the Monarch. And that's amazing. Like all of that is really great. But yeah, I don't know if it actually will play out like that. But if you test Puppet Plant, let me know. Like if you play the Frog deck and you just decide to run a couple games where you test Puppet Plant against Hero Beat, I would like to know how well that goes. Also, stealing Absolute Zero could be pretty cool, just to attack over something again like Fossil Dyna and then tribute it. And even though you're going to lose your Monarch or whatever you tributed it for, you could target a back row instead. So you could just go like tribute, take it, attack over another guy, and then tribute for a Monarch and target a back row. And then that way you clear a lot of your opponent's cards with just Puppet Plant and a Caius or a Ryza. So I can see that being really good. Legendary Jiu-Jitsu Master. So this is another thing that I think is B tier. And the reason I really think it's B tier is because I think Snowman Eater is an A tier side deck card. Snowman Eater might even be S tier, honestly. After the year that it's been having, there's so many things I can say about Snowman Eater. Maybe Snowman Eater is S tier. I'm going to put it here. So Jiu-Jitsu Master is just worse Snowman Eater in my opinion. The 1900 defense differential it's big. Like the fact that Snowman is 19 and the fact that Jiu-Jitsu Master is 18, it matters a lot because, again, Hero Beat is one of the most popular decks in the format, and being able to wall off an Alias is a key to doing well in Edison right now. Also, spinning things to the top isn't always good. Like, if your opponent attacks with Stratos into a face down Jiu-Jitsu Master, they're not exactly mad about that. And even worse is them attacking with a Monarch into a face down Jiu-Jitsu Master. Another reason why I don't really like it. And if you're wondering what deck would ever have Jiu-Jitsu Master against a Monarch, well, there's that evil hero deck. And I've played against it at Nationals, and I played against it before that as well. And that deck kind of main deck Jiu-Jitsu Master because it's a rock monster. So I've seen it come up where you'll swing into a face down and it's that, and you're like, oh, I'll put my Caius on top gladly. Like, that is an exchange I'm willing to take. Anyways, I know why this card is sided. It's good against fairies. It's good against decks like Glad Beast. Fairies have a really hard time with 1800 defense monsters. Like Hamster's a god card against decks like fairies. And Jiu-Jitsu Master is even more insane because spinning back a Shining Angel or a Nova Summoner or a Dialk or whatever, really, really strong. They don't really have many things that could beat over it without adding extra layers or committing more cards to the field. So it's good against that, but that, I don't think fairies is that well represented enough to side deck Jiu-Jitsu Master. Like, we're not in a fairy format. The deck is not really that played. Whereas Hero Beat is, and also Black Wings, I think Snowman Eater is very good against Black Wings. So just off the basis that Snowman Eater is good against Black Wings and Hero Beat, two very popular S tier decks, I would say Snowman is easily S tier. It's also water, and coincidentally, Miracle Fusion format, YGO Sirocco format. So like it has everything going for it. The fact that it's a water monster is not really something to scoff at. Like that is a really big part of it too. But having that 1900 defense, man, that it comes up so often that an Alias will attack this face down. And even if they have a Hero Blast or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like you're getting them to use a trap card. So that's one less trap, one less chainable trap at that you have to worry about when you're making your plays. But yeah, after Deck Devastators 4, especially where like the whole top 8 was basically maining or siding Snowman Eater. Like literally everybody, I'm pretty sure, was maining or siding it. Yeah, that just showed that this card is worth its weight in gold right now. Thunder King Rai-Oh, I'm actually going to put this in C tier. It's the same thing with Breaker where fairy decks side this card because it gets around deck devastation virus. So I get that part, but the problem is it's not really good against mini decks. Like most of the S tier decks, Thunder King just doesn't come in against. Like you don't bring it against Frogs. You don't bring it against Diva Hero. You could bring it against Hero Beat, but I think that even that is kind of like meh because Miracle Fusion, and it just crashes with Alias. And it's a Hero Blast target that just gets absolutely ruined by it. Like you just go minus on Hero Blast right there. It's decent against zombies. I'll give it that. Like Thunder King is genuinely decent against zombies. But yeah, like Black Wings, Vayu, Frogs, Diva Hero, I don't really like Thunder King against those matchups. Where I think it does shine, it's pretty good against Dragon Turbo. Again, it could be good against Hero Beat turn 1 specifically when they have their Rotas and E-Calls unresolved in their hand. Like, yeah, that could catch them pretty bad. And I'm trying to think of other matchups where I would want Thunder King. Like again, Zombies is pretty decent. You can stop Gamma Zombie from searching, which is big. But not much else. Like any deck playing Hamster, Rai-Oh, Caius Engine, you don't want Thunder King against, and that is a lot of the decks in the format. So yeah, I'm not a fan of Thunder King, never really have been. And the same is true. So Kaiku, the Ghost Destroyer, this card, it might be like B tier now, just because of how popular the decks are that it's kind of good against, but it does suffer from some issues. So this card kind of assumes that you're in a already winning game state to be able to get the damage off. It can be good in a Value Turbo mirror match, and it can be good against frogs, but I'm using can be because it's very coin flippy on whether or not it's going to be. Especially now that the frog decks are playing Alias, like I have been a big advocate of adding the 1 Alias to the deck, and it seems like a lot of people are following suit with that. And that just helps to out this card cleanly. If you're behind, Kaiku is one of the worst cards. But I do like that Value Turbo deck, it sides out its Hamsters and Rai-Ohs and stuff like that against Monarchs to put in things like Kaiku and Fossil Dyna, because setting monsters is a death sentence against Monarchs. So in that regard, like it makes sense for that specific scenario, but I really don't care for it a lot of the other times. But it is something that it's a nice one-up. It reminds me of Soul Release. Like I would say Soul Release is relatively close to Kaiku in power level. Just like, yeah, if you're going to side it, just side 1 copy. Like don't side more than 1 copy of Kaiku, don't side more than 1 copy of Soul Release. And when we do the when we do the spell side deck tier list, I'll talk more about Soul Release then. But Kaiku and Soul Release are very similar to me. You just saw 1 copy of it, and if you see it, nice. If you don't, you're also just not mad about it really. But because it's such a narrow side deck card, I have it in C tier. It's very, very, very narrow. It's a normal summon. It has weird attack stats, like 1800 is not exactly the best. And again, if you're not already in a good position, then it's just not that good itself. Okay, Koa'ki Meiru Drago. So the truth about this one is that any deck that's siding this is probably also maining it when you think about it, right? Like there's no deck I can think of that sides Koa'ki Meiru Drago that also isn't at least maining a copy. But I do notice that most of the decks that side Koa'ki Meiru Drago, they only play 1 of it typically in the main deck, and then they side like 2 copies. So this is a real side deck card. Typically it's just dragons I'm talking about. Like if we're just being transparent, it's just dragons. I think this is a pretty good card though. Like it's very, very good for the dragon deck. Like it's up there in terms of flooding out an opponent that's playing a light or dark deck. It's 1900. That attack stat is insane. I've been very frantic around this card because it can just allow that guaranteed damage the same way Fossil Dyna does. Like sometimes it just absolutely out of nowhere, you could just lose the game if your opponent summons Red Eyes, summons another guy, and then normal summons Koa'ki Meiru Drago. So it's 28 plus 19 plus whatever else they brought out. You could just die out of nowhere. And it doesn't care about Gores or Battle Fader or Tragonia or anything like that. If your field is open, Drago is a nightmare card. So it's a very, very strong card against the decks that you would bring it in against. And I think that dragons in general have gotten a lot more popular, and the lists have gotten a lot better this year. And also the fact that Koa'ki Meiru Drago happens to be good against a lot of the S tier decks. Like so many of the S tier decks are light and dark decks, right? So yeah, this card is pretty decent. Vanity's Fiend is A tier. I don't have it quite as high up as Fossil Dyna because it's a tribute monster, but it is very, very strong. It can just win games on its own. Like both this and Fossil Dyna can, and obviously Drago too, they can all just win games by themselves because that's the nature of a Floodgate. Vanity's Fiend can be very hard to out, and I am a big fan of it, but I think that some of the games that you lose are because you couldn't stick a Vanity's Fiend, or it was awkward to stick a Vanity's Fiend. Like your opponent did something where it's like, damn, I have Vanity's Fiend here and I wish it was anything else because I don't have the board presence to really establish this thing and make it meaningful. But yeah, it can totally just solo a game. I think we've all seen it. It's probably happened to you before at some point during the format. You've probably done it to somebody during the format, but Vanity's Fiend is very, very strong. Electric Virus, I will put in the same tier as like the Puppet Plant. In theory, against dragons, like this is an insane card. And we've even seen Carpath use it when he won, was it Deck Devastators 3, 2, one of those. This came up a lot. It was, I think the actual reason why he said he won the tournament is because he happened to side this because he knew that his worst matchup was like dragons. And this card is basically a god card against that deck. Like if they summon double Red Eyes, this can take one and crash them. And that is something that is not common without like brain control. So having multiple ways to do that specific thing is a big deal. Also, in a rare instance that you're able to take a 5-headed dragon, like that's also insane. If dragons become more popular, I can see this card being sided more. Like frogs could definitely side this. Frogs could side puppet plant. Like the crazy thing is the frog deck can just morph into a way where no matter what the format becomes, it can become more narrow with its side deck options to just stop the decks that are becoming too popular. So if dragons became too popular, or if hero beat became like, I don't know, 60% of the field, which probably will never happen because this is Edison, but if that were to ever happen, then the cards like these, Puppet Plant and Electric Virus, they could be sided, and they're really, really strong. And I think that Electric Virus could be sided by other decks as well. Any deck that's playing like double or triple Kaias could probably get away with it too. But yeah, I do like those, in theory. Okay, Sirocco. So I'm gonna put this in A tier. Most of the decks that you would see this sided in are probably going to be frog decks. I don't really know what other deck would side Sirocco. I'm trying to think. Is there anything else that would side Sirocco? Yeah, I don't really know. I think frogs are just the deck that sides this card, but I think that this is a very good side deck card against Value and Blackwings, especially if you're playing a build that runs Threatening Roar or Waboku, because those builds are able to protect it. So after you summon it and you pump and you attack over their guy, then you set Threatening Roar Waboku, and your opponent can't even attack over it. And if they try to, it'll probably be with a Blackwing monster, which is super awkward because you're like Threatening Roar, draw, pump again. So if that play ever comes up, it's probably just GG right there. It's just too much damage and card advantage and tempo and all that good stuff. I remember Rana sided 3 copies of it in Burn Frogs, and he was already playing triple Waboku, triple Threatening Roar, and I imagine that this just trivializes that matchup to a large degree. So I am a fan of the Sirocco side deck. I wouldn't be surprised if more decks could get away with siding this card. If you struggle with Blackwings or Value, consider it, especially if you're playing a deck that has a good amount of traps to defend it. But yeah, 2000 stats are also good. Like if you run into randomly GBs or something like that, like this card's also good against that. And last but not least, we have Banisher of the Radiant. So I'm going to put this in C tier. This is like at its best turn 1 before your opponent has any setup. But I think that any deck that could side this, your opponent is also siding things like Snowman Eater and Cyber Dragon. And this card runs into those really, really poorly. Even Jujutsu Master. So I'm not really a fan. It also has those awkward stats like 1600. You can't really side this against Value because they can just attack over it with a Griffer. You never side this against Heroes because Stratos beats over it and they play like 5 copies of that thing. Alias beats over it. Like everything beats over this thing. And then even against Frogs, if it's not turn 1 and the frog deck gets to do a substitute play, then your Banisher won't do anything. And I don't like the fact that it just gets easily walled off by a dupe frog or again a Snowman Eater or whatever. It's just not in a good place in Edison format. I can't really think of a deck where this card is like absolutely insane outside of turn 1. Like on turn 1, sure, it's at its peak, but then it just makes your opponent play like a super defensive way where they're going to set Deep Prison before they do anything, or they're going to like set Snowman Eater or Brain Control it, attack you and then tribute it or whatever. Like it can be a disruptor. I just don't think that Edison is in a state where this turn 1 is even that strong, and that is the best that it can be is turn 1. I guess like against zombies, if you catch them slipping and they set a Recruiter and you summon Banisher, like sure, you got them there for sure. But like even that deck is playing very defensive. Banisher has those stats where it gets bottomless and deprisoned. It's interesting. Everything in C tier, they're all weak to both bottomless and deprison. Deprison is the most popular card in the format. And yes, if you look at the whole tier list here, like there are other cards that also get bottomless or deprisoned. I guess False 9 is one of the cards that gets under bottomless specifically. And so does Grand Mole, but that is why they are partial. That is one of the reasons why they are higher tiers, because they get under those cards, but also because the stat lines aren't as awkward, and you can set things like DD Warrior Lady, you could set Fossil Dyna, whereas everything in C tier, like if it gets bottomless or deprisoned, it's kind of awkward. Breaker could get some value beforehand, but that card is just asking to be bought. Like if they have bottomless, it just blatantly will just cause them to flip it 100%. You can consider that a good thing or a bad thing. It really depends on where the game state is at the time, where your life points are. But like, yeah, Banisher is a card that I feel like with 3 D-Prisons and a lot of decks, and D-Prison being the most popular card in the format, it's not that scary if you open with it, because every deck that you would play this against probably has some form of disruption against it as well. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this monster side deck tier list. I'll definitely be dropping one for spells and then one for traps as well. But I wanted to get the ball rolling with this at least, because I feel like it would have been too much to try to do all of the side deck cards in one video. There's over, I think I have like 50 side deck cards that I wanted to cover. And also, if you see anything missing here, let me know in the comments. But these are the ones that I feel like are most relevant. I went through a lot of deck lists that actually have top tournaments to find side deck monsters. And this is pretty much what I came with as cards that people actually have been siding in top 8 deck lists. I don't want to get too fringe and start pulling out side deck options that I really don't see anyone siding. Like I kind of wanted to cover Jinzo, but I was like, I don't really see anyone siding Jinzo. Not even Frogs do, so I just left it out. But even if you have something that you feel like is rising in popularity or could become good or could become popular, put that in the comments. And that's something that I could talk about later on as well. Because Edison, despite being a locked format, there are still techs and things like that that haven't been discovered yet or that people don't realize are better than they seem. And I don't want to miss anything. So if I can help, I'm down to talk about it. If I feel like it's actually decent or could be decent, I'll talk about it. But until then, I will catch you in the next one. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And I am getting out of here. Peace.